Dan Rubenstein, you want to give out some report cards today?
You know what's a funny thing here, Ty, is I got an email, I don't know, 3 hours ago from my son's school, the older guy, the 6-year-old school, literally got his first report card today.
Oh, this is breaking news. I'm not going to play the sound,
this is breaking news.
What's the report on the little man?
Everything is fine. Everything is good. But I got a frantic call from Jody with an eye saying, oh God, got like a category of like, could use some work. Oh God. And so I don't know who the football equivalent of that is, but I think he put in kind of like an admirable John Sumrall start to his school year. And I got a frantic Brent Brennan call. So we're working through things, Ty. He's in good shape. I like it.
Do they still go OS and U? Or
no, it's a bunch of categories that is like shows proficiency in communicating, blah, like, and there's like different categories within a chart. And so it's not a standard letter or number like the outstanding, satisfactory, needs improvement kind of thing. It's little phrases that he checks or does not check.
Well, we can do a post-game interview with him as part of our bonus content,
sure.
Which you can find out at verballers.com, verballers.com. Bonus content, ad-free episodes, access to the full Verballerhood and our Discord server as well. We're not going to be giving out those grades for the little man today. We're actually going to be taking a look back at first-year coaches. It was a robust season of first-year coaches, both in name and in number. We're going to go back through them. We're going to give out some grades for some of the most notable, not all of them. Again, there were 31. We've got a big list in front of us here, some that I think are meaningful to our Verballerhood. Again, please hit follow, please hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our off-season episodes, Dan. It took a little bit to go through all these guys. It really did. And we broke it down into, I think, a couple different categories for how we want to score each of these names. If that's cool, I can read these off for a second.
Please do.
The first was, what did they inherit? Right, what's the starting point? Not everybody had the same starting point. I would expect when we get to a guy like a Sherrone Moore, that's going to be an interesting conversation.
And by the way, it's not just what you inherit in terms of a roster. It's what you inherit in terms of culture, in terms of vibes, in terms of commitment behind the scenes, right? It's not just like, oh yeah, this roster's stacked and ready to roll into the playoff. Like there's a lot that, a lot of elbow grease that a lot of these guys needed to put in.
Secondly, what'd they bring in? Either via recruiting, the transfer portal. Even this extends, I think, to assistants and now front office and personnel management.
Sure.
Given where we're at in college football. What did they do on that front? How do we grade them out? The third is, how close were they to being better or in some cases worse as compared to a year ago? Did they move the program forward? Did they take a step back? Some of that stuff can be explained given some of the variables we're going to talk through, but better or worse.
Squint and see what they're going for.
What's the philosophy, right? Yeah. What's the general arc of where things seem to be headed? And to that point, what's the outlook moving forward with respect to recruiting, portal, schedules? I think play a pretty big part in this conversation, to be honest with you. Is there the quarterback of the future or the guy that you can build around otherwise?
Yeah.
That type of thing. Very important. Were they able to establish themselves, either find that guy who was on the existing roster or bring somebody in some cases, that can be that dude moving forward. And then finally, just stability, especially in this era of college football. And, we've talked about this a lot on the show, how stability, how alignment, how all of these things, making sure everybody's on the same page, especially when a new coach comes in. That is like the currency of college football right now. NIL being what it is, and transfer portal and recruiting and this new world order with the expanded playoff. Stability, alignment, still what makes this whole thing go efficiently and successfully if you are any of these new guys taking over in a new spot.
I think about that word a lot, by the way, alignment, because you see that more and more. Like, oh, I want to go somewhere where everybody's aligned, or the alignment wasn't on where it should have been. I was thinking about that, like, how do you distill that word down to its essence? I think alignment is people are paying money and letting me decide the decisions that I want to make. And the decisions I don't want to make, I get to decide who is making those decisions. And so it's a certain amount of like the money's there and the power is there how I want it to be. That's right. I think that's what alignment is, reading between as many lines as I can. Continue.
We're going to use those 5 things in our little rubric here.
Yeah.
As we talk through, again, a list of coaches. We would encourage you all to weigh in. Let us know wherever you can leave a comment. Please do so. solidverbal@gmail.com. We read all the emails. We get a lot of them, but we read all the emails. If you've got something to say that goes above and beyond what we talk about here. But very interested to hear from the Verballerhood with respect to how do you grade these guys? How do you grade these guys? Now, before we move into this, we should determine how we want to grade these guys, because the most obvious way to do so is A, B, C, D, F. Okay, we could go O, S, and U. Yeah. We could go needs proficiency, like your little man. Like, what is?
Whoa!
What are we going with here?
Yeah. I think grades. I think just letter grades, A through F, with a minus and plus kicker. So I'm good with that.
Let's dive in.
You're the best of the class this year.
Did they play that out in Southern California?
No, you asked me this before. They may have somewhere, but not to my eyes. I never saw that on local news or anything.
People need to weigh in. I can't imagine I am the only area of the country, or I came from the only area of the country that played that song. And what they would do at the end of each school year, in our area, it was 6 ABC. They would play at the station out of Philly. They would get this montage of local high school students who were graduating. They would get their yearbook photos, and they would just cycle it through with like a longer version of that song playing.
How many views does that have on YouTube?
That song?
Yeah, it looked like it had about 8,000 views. So I don't know if it was a national phenomenon.
Well, I don't know if the song, I can't imagine that there are a whole lot of people Googling the song.
Okay.
Of course, that would be me. But solidverbal@gmail.com. Let me know if I was the only one seeing that on TV. They still do it on TV. I still see it on the local stations. They play this sort of touching rendition to high school graduates.
All right. Where are we starting?
Let's start with Curt Cignetti.
Yes.
Curt Cignetti goes to Indiana from James Madison, finishes 11-2, goes to the playoff, loses in the first round to Notre Dame, but given where that
the ire of Kirk Herbstreit and Jean McDonough,
given where that program was at before he got there, obviously 11-2 and a playoff appearance is a pretty big jump. The other thing that I think we should point out, and you mentioned this to me about mid-season, I think after talking to our friend West Coast Kevin, this was about Indiana not actually being Indiana.
Right.
Because of the transfer portal. And it's such a good point that I think all too often is overlooked when we talk about these teams.
They weren't the little giants running the annexation of Puerto Rico. Suddenly they were getting so much more creative and inspired. You know, it wasn't a carryover roster of players in the way that it was for some teams that, you know, were coached up in a more impressive way. This was just new players wearing the same uniform.
Right. So it's like Indiana in name only.
Yeah.
At least as compared to previous versions, because they took on so many transfers and kind of rebuilt that roster on the fly.
Yeah.
So 11-2, I mean, it's hard to give him anything other than an A, right? I mean, this far exceeded expectations for Indiana. I was looking through my notes here of what I thought, and I like Curtis Rourke. Obviously, I thought pretty highly of the receiving core. I liked a lot of the pieces, but there were real questions about what are they going to look like on defense. Truly, what are they going to look like across the board? Because it's a new coach, new scheme. How is Curt Cignetti, who had been a serial winner, how is his style of football going to translate to Bloomington, Indiana? And it turned out it worked famously well. So anything other than an A feels like almost mind-boggling to me.
I have something other than an A.
Okay.
I have an A+.
Okay.
I have an A+ because I don't know if A+ is the best possible hire that relative to place got the best possible results. Realistic, but best possible results. And I say, relative to place with all the transfers and everything, it was a great schedule to have a breakout season record-wise and performance-wise against. Even with a backup quarterback, they beat Washington, I think, by double digits. And they lost games and perhaps were close in games that was defensible. Close against Michigan, lost to Ohio State, then, of course, to Notre Dame in the playoff. The emotional reactions to Indiana's place in the playoff and Indiana's place in the conversation at or near the top of the sport has nothing to do with them or the job that Curt Cignetti did. And so relative to what you could expect given your place and expectations, A+. I don't think you can surpass that kind of year one performance, especially with how often he hit in the portal and what he got out of the returning players. A+, that's the standard.
How do we feel about Indiana now going forward, though? Was this a situation where we're going to look back on the 24 season and say, Curt Cignetti was a victim of his own success? Because we've seen that with many a coach over the years, where they come in, they do something successful their first campaign, and then everyone is holding them up to that standard moving forward, and it's hard to get back, especially where Indiana got this season. I think his ability to build that roster on the fly last year and on the spreadsheet that I'm looking at now to put up green in so many categories definitely speaks to his value as a coach.
Yeah.
But now it's a matter of, okay, you built this thing on the fly through the portal. You got to do it year in and year out until the high school recruiting picks up.
Yeah, so the vibes are strong to quite strong. Obviously, he is the vibe. Curt Cignetti is, in terms of the boldness with which he speaks, and obviously he backed it up in year one. So good for you. Keep doing it. They put together a top 40 class. They bring in Fernando Mendoza, who seems like he has at the very least, a high floor as a quality starting quarterback. They should win. They should be a bowl team once again. I think the schedule's tougher. I believe they travel to Eugene this coming year. But if they're going to recruit somewhat nationally, if not, regionally in the Big Ten, there's a vacuum when you look at a place like Wisconsin. Like, who is going to be the Wisconsin archetype in the Big Ten of year in and year out quality? Will beat everyone, if not most everyone, that has comparable talent, and maybe upset somebody better or put the fear of God into a stacked Michigan or Ohio State, something like that. I think Indiana, the vibes are extraordinarily strong moving forward. And if they can get the recruiting level to top 30, that's when we really get spicy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, just relative to their peers in the Big Ten, they finished with the 14th best recruiting class. Again, there's now a lot of teams in the Big Ten, so that's near the bottom. However, a top 20 transfer destination is something that jumps off the page at me. I just saw, I'm sure some others out there saw, they got Pat Coogan from Notre Dame, who was along Notre Dame's offensive line. They also got a former Notre Damer who had gone to Tennessee, but now is coming back to the state of Indiana, Holden Stays, who's perhaps a playmaking tight end, didn't get a whole lot of action at Tennessee. You mentioned Fernando Mendoza. Also, Roman Hemby, the running back from Maryland, comes over and should give them a bit of a boost in the backfield as well. So, I get the sense that there is a philosophy. I get the sense that Curt Cignetti knows what he is doing. You just don't always hit if you're going to be so heavy on the transfer portal year in and year out. And I think they're probably confined to that until some of the high school recruiting picks up, because it's just not there yet. Doesn't mean he can't be a good scout. Doesn't mean he can't find diamonds in the rough. But I think to get to the point where they're going to be doing this year in and year out, you're not going to be able to rely on the portal in the manner that they did a year ago. It's just too much variability.
They have a stretch of Illinois at Iowa, a bye week, and then they're in Eugene, Oregon to play against the Ducks. Later in the season, they go to Beaver Stadium between Maryland and Wisconsin. So a tougher schedule for sure in getting Iowa, Penn State, and Oregon.
So we'll give Coach Sig an A+. I'm cool with that.
Absolutely.
If he is the top of the top on our list, who is bottom of the barrel?
From this specific list of first-year coaches, I think all things considered, given inheritance, given like inherited vibes, inherited roster. I might be Brent Brennan.
That was going to be my answer.
When you have one of the premier quarterback to receiver duos nationally heading into the season, the expectation was that Noah Fifita and T-Mac were going to continue to be very dangerous. And even considering losses on defense, even considering obviously a new coaching staff, 2 new coordinators, a coach leaving late in the process, given when Nick Saban retired after the playoff and Kalen DeBoer leaving for Alabama, Jedd Fisch going to Washington, all those things considered, the manner in which Arizona was winning games early and losing games the rest of the way made me feel like, oh, the plan was not a good plan from the outset, and it was not fixable in October or November, and the vibes seemed very down, culminating obviously in the loss to a rival to finish out the year. That they weren't a bowl team at the very least this season in a Big 12 that had quality but not superpower quality. I think that's a real tough year one for me.
They had a stretch starting first week of October, concluding, I guess, first week of November on the road against UCF, where they dropped 5 straight. Lost to Texas Tech, a close one at home. Got hammered by BYU on the road, got hammered by Colorado at home, lost a close one at home against West Virginia, and then got drilled 56-12 on the road.
And in like a
UCF.
Sloppy way, too. It wasn't just like an incompetent way. It was turnovers and, brain farts. And it was just like signs of a poorly coached team.
Yeah. I mean, you look at their turnover margin. They finished the year -4. Noah Fifita threw 12 picks this season. It's not to say that Teteroa McMillan didn't get his. He had over 1,300 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. But more to the point, we talked about this on the last episode. It did kind of feel like he disappeared this season. After 2 straight years of him very much being in the public consciousness with respect to star players in college football, we didn't hear much from him. And it was a bad team, I get it, but I would expect this offense to be a lot better just simply by having those 2 guys back on the same side. Remember, that was a big deal for Brent Brennan when he took over.
Yeah.
Jedd Fisch leaves. Are these guys going to leave? No, they're sticking together. They're going to stay here. And obviously they needed more than just 2 of them to make this thing go, but really bad on both offense and defense.
Yeah. And he didn't disappear in that he was productive. He disappeared in that Arizona did not play in a meaningful game with any sort of consequence. And so why would you pay attention closely to an Arizona game in mid to late October? And so then you're not paying attention to one of the best receivers in the country. So, yeah.
The stability question that we brought up is, I think, interesting because in the immediate aftermath of the Arizona season, it was kind of an open secret that there were at least deliberations as to whether or not they wanted to break with Brent Brennan.
Right.
As to, should we be going a completely different direction here? It seemed as if he was a bit over his skis in year one. He's got a connection to the university. I don't think anyone's against the guy personally, but clearly the results weren't there.
Yeah.
Hearing that after year one and knowing the kind of performance they had, finishing, what'd they finish? 4-8? That does not leave me feeling all that confident about the vibe moving forward.
No. Didn't like the coordinator hires when they happened. Dino Babers off of getting fired from Syracuse, and Dwayne Aquina, who I don't know who they were competing with for Dwayne Aquina's coordinator services. Obviously, an incredible defensive backs coach, incredible secondary coach, time at Arizona, Texas, Stanford. But no, I would have liked more creativity. I'm not going full F. I'm going to go DD plus, given the challenges involved with the timing of everything. When Jedd Fisch left and the shock that he would leave, given what they were returning. I mean, it's never shocking when Jedd Fisch leaves for a new job, obviously.
Of course not.
But I guess the timing of it makes it kind of difficult to say this is fully on him, that this was such a disappointing season. So I'm going to say DD plus.
We have 13 other names on this list.
Okay.
Of the other 13, if Coach Cignetti is at the top and Brent Brennan's at the bottom, of the other 13 names in the middle, who stood out to you most? Maybe not necessarily for being A plus, but somebody that exceeded your expectations in a really meaningful way.
Oh, exceeded expectations?
Exceeded your expectations.
Yeah. Oh, Franimal, for sure.
Fran Brown.
Yes. Speaking of Dino Babers. Yes. The Franimal, Fran Brown at Syracuse obviously came in with high program level experience coaching under Matt Rule and Kirby Smart. That they were immediately able to get what they got out of Kyle McCord, that they were able to hit on both sides of the ball in the portal. You saw how active he was in hiring Elijah Robinson, obviously, and bringing over players from Georgia and Texas A&M, Ohio State. So high-level program transfers. That's my radio voice just slipping in there. High level. Real impressive transfers. That they were able to hit the way that they did, whether it was at receiver, whether it was on the edge. Look, at times their defense, especially against the run, was catastrophically bad. But all things considered, they were like a weird... I mean, it was a Stanford long field goal to win that game, I believe.
Sure.
They were not terribly far off from even a crazier record. Now, they won a couple close ones as well, so you got to consider that. But, I don't know. The energy seems very high at Syracuse. They got the most out of LaQuinn Allen on the ground. They were able to win losable moments, I guess would be the optimistic silver lining way of saying, like, yeah, if you're going to go to overtime against UNLV, win that game. And they did. And so winning those losable moments, winning the Cal game, finishing the season like they did against, I believe, Wazoo in the bowl game, a very depleted Wazoo, all things considered. Right. If they can figure out defense and they can somehow, some way navigate what appears to be the craziest road schedule of 2025.
Read this off for people.
I sent this to you. Okay. This season, Syracuse has Tennessee in Atlanta to open the season, I believe late August, early September. And then at Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame this season. So if Fran Brown and Syracuse exceeded my 2024 expectations, if they're at 7 wins, 8 wins,
I was going to say, if he goes 8-4 this year, that's an A++.
Absolutely. And I don't know what those teams are going to be, but given that they're on the road, Syracuse needs to recruit better out of high school. They're going to need to build out depth. Quarterback is an open question. I think it might be Ricky Collins, the LSU transfer, who steps in at quarterback, but that's going to be an open battle. So if they can figure out the lines moving forward, get a few more stops on defense, and get a little bit of juice in the Northeast, why not 8-9 wins a season? Why not?
It's an interesting question about the Franimal because Syracuse, to some extent, benefited from that schedule. It was part of the reason we liked Fran Brown a lot coming into the 24 season because the schedule was very, very optimal. I mean, it set up real nicely for him to get to a 10-3 season.
I have straight A. I don't know what you have.
No, it's an A. It's absolutely an A. It's absolutely an A. And I think the vibes are there.
Definitely.
You know, they keep, now that people kind of know the deal with Fran Brown, they keep putting him on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will definitely have a positive effect on the program because he seems like the kind of dude you want to play for.
Agree.
He's all emotion. There's a little bit of like Kenny Dillingham Northeast going on there. So I'm into Fran Brown. I'm into the Franimal. I hope he's showered this offseason. It's a long offseason.
Yes.
But I think we go A.
Yeah, they need a defense. And to win 10 games with the bowl win without much of a defense, the back end certainly better than the front. But I don't know. I think all things considered, and we listed off a bunch of teams on their schedule that have their own questions.
Sure.
So if Syracuse is solidifying and some of these schools aren't, we'll see. A lot of these schools starting new quarterbacks or have quarterback questions. I'm excited if I'm a Syracuse fan.
Where do we put somebody like a Manny Diaz at Duke?
I have also an A for Manny Diaz. Now,
Manny Diaz went 9-4 this year at Duke. We had a number of ACC fans, a couple Duke fans, email us throughout the course of the year that Duke was the worst. I think at the time we got it, it was like an 8-win team.
Right.
They're the worst 8-win team ever.
Great.
Finished 9-4.
Yeah.
Look, 9-4 is 9-4, and the defense played well throughout the course of the season. The offense had its moments. I'm looking at success rates, especially running the football.
Oh yeah, they couldn't run it at all.
They are not great.
No.
This was not a complete team, but the two things that I think are meaningful here are A, Manny Diaz was able to come in and play defense. Defensively, the numbers hold up. And then B, in terms of vibes, in terms of moving things forward, they got a big transfer quarterback. They got one of the better transfer quarterbacks after Malik Murphy decided.
They spent. There's money there. Yeah.
And they spent the money. And that's I think the undercurrent that I wanted to speak to. Duke is obviously known more for a basketball program than a football program.
Yep.
But if they've got a coach now who knows how to coach up defense, if they're able to attract top talent like Darian Mensah, who's, again, definitely had a market for himself in the transfer portal, if they're able to spend and get a guy like that to come in and hopefully reboot the offense, that to me signals more success to come, potentially. Yeah. Now, again, not a complete team, but that to me seems promising, especially on the heels of a 9-win season.
Okay, so when you look at the context of their season as well, you have to look at one. They started the season out with Elon, Northwestern, which we went to, UConn, who was pretty good, but not incredible, at Middle Tennessee. So there's no power to open the season for Duke, and they took care of business. That's what pretty decent teams do. They had a sort of weird up and down game against North Carolina, as North Carolina's fading. Good for them. Beat a rival, always positive. They lost to a quality Georgia Tech team by 10. They were 2 yards away from beating SMU in a multiple overtime game at home, a wild multiple. I think they decided to go for 2 in the win in that game, and they didn't get it. That was a great almost moment, I guess. And look, it's close against Virginia Tech. It's close against Wake Forest, whatever. They took care of business. And if you're asking me if a 9-3 regular season, 2 yards away from beating a playoff team to get to 10 regular season wins in year one of a new coach, I have straight A for Manny Diaz.
No, it was an incredibly successful campaign. I felt good for him just personally because of how he got run out of Miami at the end of his tenure. That was very ugly before they brought Cristobal over. So the fact that he was able to get a new gig on the heels of, again, a really successful campaign coaching up the defense for Penn State, to go to a place like a Duke to have immediate success in the manner that he did, that was pretty cool. Now, next season, I'm looking at the schedule here. There are some interesting matchups on this Duke schedule.
But no Miami or SMU, I believe.
No Miami, no SMU.
Yeah.
There is a all-time basketball matchup week 2 of the season against Illinois, with Illinois coming to town.
Yeah.
They are on the road at Tulane. This is the Darian Mensah revenge game, I guess.
Revenge.
But then beyond that, Dan, they're at home against NC State, on the road against Syracuse and Cal.
Hold on, let's back up real quick. A team is going to Central Western New York, followed by going to the Bay Area.
It's a lot of travel. A lot of travel.
If you're Duke, do you just go to Syracuse and then fly to, I don't know what's halfway, fly to Omaha, practice for the week, and just keep on going out to Cal?
Omaha is like the convention capital of the United States for that reason.
Yeah.
So maybe they could. They're on the road at Clemson to start things off first week of November. But this looks like a workable schedule to me. There are a lot of teams on this back half of the schedule that I've got real questions about, even in the front part of the schedule. So it's conducive, I think, to another good season for Manny Diaz if he can do what he did this past year. So I give him an A as well. I think I'm with you on that front.
There's very little reason, if they're spending money and they can win without an offense, that if we're saying Duke's offense is definitely going to improve moving forward, that they shouldn't be winning 7.23 games a year. Like, they should be a solid college football bowl team for years to come, I think.
If we've got Cignetti, the Franimal, and Manny Diaz right now being the upper crust, and we've got Brent Brennan all the way at the bottom. Let's continue working the extremes here a little bit. If I throw out David Braun, if I throw out Jeff Lebby,
yeah,
which of those two names? I'll put Willie Fritz in here too. Which of those three names would you put above the other two?
Braun, Lebby, Fritz.
Braun, Lebby, Fritz. How would you rank them out? What would their grades be? Assuming that we gave Brent Brennan a D.
I think I would have Fritz over both. I think I would go Fritz, Lebby, Braun in this moment, just because you can anchor one of those teams to something that's already looking solid, which is the Houston defensive ceiling. I think Houston is also going to be more of a portal destination than either of those two places, Mississippi, than Starkville or Evanston. Fritz also has won wherever he's been as a head coach. And this is Jeff Lebby head coach for the first time. This is David Braun head coach, I believe, in both of these instances for the first time. And so my belief is that even though Houston's offense, much like Northwestern's, was catastrophically bad, there's more going for Fritz in terms of my belief and in projected future vibes.
The Jeff Lebby conversation's
and the conference he plays in too, right? There's more wiggle room for Houston. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's true for David Braun too. I'd put David Braun at the bottom here.
I think so.
I'd go Fritz, I'd go Lebby, and then I'd go Braun. The Lebby thing is interesting because Mississippi State's schedule was just brutal, and you could say that about any number of SEC teams, but truly, given where they were at, starting over, new coach, he went out, he worked the portal pretty hard in the offseason to try and put that roster together. It was not in a good place, and it showed going 2-10. Against the competition they faced, it was over before it started. That said, at least for a hot minute, we were pretty excited about finding Michael Van Buren. Because Blake Shapen goes down with the shoulder thing, he's out, then that gave them an opportunity to develop Michael Van Buren. So I think when that happened, in the moment, I was like, vibes are good. You might have found a quarterback.
Right.
And then he transferred to LSU. So no longer the Van Buren boys in Starkville. With him leaving now, there is this open question of, is it going to, Blake Shapen, I guess, can come back. He plans to come back at last reporting that we saw. He plans to come back and sort of take that medical red shirt. They got Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State to come over as well as he transfers out. So I think the quarterback now is again an open question that I don't feel particularly great about. It is not the easiest place in the world to recruit, and then you've got to deal with that schedule every year, which is just not going to get. It might not be as bad as it was a year ago, but you're always going to have to contend with that if you're in the SEC. So it's really tough to see how you get that fire started unless you find another Van Buren or somebody that you feel like you can build around.
So the reason why I'd be high on Mississippi State is I think the ceiling in terms of recruiting can be pretty high.
Which we've seen. We've seen that.
We've seen that. The ceiling in terms of portal with quality prospects from the South, from Mississippi, having access to junior college in ways that other schools don't with the high-level JCs in Mississippi. Right? There's an interesting ceiling for Mississippi State. Obviously, the SEC is now a deeper conference with Texas and Oklahoma in terms of talent acquisition and just flat out winning games. I liked there was a gutty quality to Mississippi State that even though they weren't getting blown out from the jump, they weren't losing every game 42-3. They were scoring points. They took advantage of the Georgia secondary, I believe. Last year they scored 30 plus points against Georgia. There are moments where you're just like, yes, this is year one. Yes, there was obviously, and for good reason, a shadow hanging over the program given Mike Leach's untimely death and that it just not working out with Zach Barnett as the new look head coach trying to change things away from the air raid. So I think it's fair to give him time. I think we can look at Mississippi State and they should have a pretty decent offense, if not this year, next year. And you should be able to find speed on offense. You should be able to find playmakers on defense, and that he's just going to need time to build out that recruiting base. And I'm not terribly down on Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State right now. It's an uphill battle. David Braun, it's hard to see Northwestern as a transfer destination. It's hard to see them working themselves to a place where they can fill that quality gap like they were able to do when there was a Big Ten West.
Yeah.
And without that, and, without, seeing like down Illinois, down Nebraska, like the floor seems to have been raised enough that they're going to need to get not lucky, but they're going to need consistent quality quarterback play and competent line play if they want to be bowling often, because this is a tough conference moving forward, just in terms of floor, that they're just not going to be able to take advantage of teams in situations like they were before.
Yeah, I think that tracks. And one of the things that I looked at a lot when we knew we were going to put this show together is the Northwestern offense. It feels like we've been going on a full generation. Like your son's entire life has been spent with a bad Northwestern offense on Saturdays. Right?
2023, David Braun was coach of the year.
Coach of the year, but maybe there's a black swan event that we could call out.
Sure.
But I think like the general vibe of this offense is just that, yeah, it'll be good here and there, but by and large, this is still not a program that knows how to put a competent offense out there consistently.
At least give David Braun enough time in Evanston to coach in a stadium.
Yeah, well, listen,
in their own stadium. Yeah.
I'm not anti-David Braun.
Yeah.
I think he's got a really tough ask in front of him. We'll see what Preston Stone brings this year. If he's, he was the kind of the big transfer, the quarterback coming up from SMU. Maybe he can give them a little bit more pop. But maybe what I'm reacting to the most is just it just does not feel like they have found that quarterback in forever.
No, and they've won without it. They have won without it.
They have,
but also a program like this is still kind of like it's not a Pat Fitzgerald team, but like he's still the living person most closely associated with this program and lives like a mile and a half away. Like there's still that thing hanging over the program, and it's going to take a while to sort of crawl out of that.
I'm going to give you 3 other names I want you to react to.
Please. So by the way, grade-wise, do you have grades for any of these guys?
I'm going C- Willie Fritz.
I'm going C+.
C+.
Yes. I mean, they beat Kansas State.
How about we split the difference? We'll go C.
Okay. I don't know what to, if you're going to Xeon Chris your way to a B+ of a season, but okay.
We'll go C. I've got C for Willie. I've got D+ for Jeff Lebby, and just a solid D for David Braun.
I have C- for Lebby. I'll give him in that C situation. I don't know.
All right.
I'm a generous grader. I call lines in tennis pretty generously because I expect it back. I'm going to call grades pretty generously. Continue.
I'm going to give you 3 names to react to.
All right.
Let's stack these guys up. Kalen DeBoer, Mike Elko, and Bill O'Brien.
Okay. B.O.B., I'm in the B+ camp with him. Given, I think on the onset, the vibes of having a coach leave to be an NFL coordinator, that the Boston College job and situation in modern college football was seen as it's too much of an uphill battle to get anything substantive done. And Bill O'Brien in year 1, without great quarterback play, made, I think, a tough decision to move on from his starting quarterback later on in the season. Was competitive against good teams, if not beating pretty good teams. Took them to a bowl game after some, down vibes within the program. I'm going to say B+ for Bill O'Brien.
I was pretty high on Boston College before the start of the year.
Yeah.
And I remember having the conversation with you where we talked it through in the preseason. I was like, there's enough here that I think they could be very competent. Not ACC championship caliber.
Right.
Though there was a moment this season where we were talking about the 9-3 goals, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
Finished 7-6 this year.
We're right there with Mizzou on the road.
Right there with Mizzou on the road.
Stomped Florida State. Vibes are always good doing that at BC. Yeah.
Went to the bowl game, lost the bowl game to Nebraska in the Mud Bowl. But the question that I had was, What's the defense going to look like? They're changing up schemes. How will that all track? I think he was able to put it together pretty nicely. And then there was the whole issue of Thomas Castellanos was the quarterback. Then midway through, he wasn't. And they switched things over to Grayson James. Thomas Castellanos now going down to Florida State. And so, they're going to have to figure out their quarterback thing again this season. Put the guy out there who gives them the best chance to win. But I would expect that it's going to be a popular spot for potential quarterbacks moving forward, given Bill O'Brien's pedigree.
Yeah, there's just, there's not as many obviously quality quarterbacks coming out of the Northeast. There sometimes accidentally there are, right? There's sleepers that come out, but it's just not an area of the country that you're going to find, a star in the making out of Jersey or Vermont or something. And where's TVD from? Connecticut. So, there are guys,
sure.
But that's the issue. But yeah, transfer destination, I think you're right. And I give him minus points because BC lost to arguably, well, they beat Florida State, but the second worst team on their schedule in Virginia.
Yeah.
That's just unacceptable.
Yeah.
So
by the way, Grayson James is back. I don't know if I even said
he is
that.
back. That's great.
He's back again. So when I say they got to figure out quarterback, I think they need to figure out how to keep developing him, because I think what he showed down the stretch was actually quite promising. So given expectations, given where BC was the previous year, the fact that they were as competent as they were, I think I'm with you, B+. I think Bill O'Brien did a good job.
They have an Alabama backup coming in at quarterback to sort of round out that room, who I don't know if you've seen a picture of, or at least the 24/7 picture of Dylan Lonergan.
Yeah.
Exactly like Matt Brown. Exactly like our friend Matt Brown, subscribe to the Extra Points newsletter. It's great.
Where are we at on Kalen DeBoer and Elko? Because there is, I think, a pretty strong school of thought that these were the top two guys last coaching carousel that jumped teams. Kalen DeBoer taking over for Saban, not necessarily the easiest spot. Mike Elko taking over for Jimbo Fisher.
Right.
Had a lot to work with, had a lot go out the door, but still had a lot of talent on hand. Kalen DeBoer finishes the year 9-4. Mike Elko finishes the year 8-5.
I gave Kalen DeBoer a B-, and I could see Alabama people giving him an F-. I couldn't go higher than B- for Kalen DeBoer.
Okay.
Given how they didn't end up in the playoff, the manner in which they did not, which is losing to both Vanderbilt in a winnable moment and losing to Oklahoma, which, by the way, defense played great. I mean, they were run on a little bit too much by Jackson Arnold, but I think it was the two touchdowns from Oklahoma were on a pick six and interception brought back to inside the 15-yard line.
Yeah.
And so defensively, they did enough in that specific game. And this was a good defense. Not always a good defense, but by and large, a good defense. And the games that they end up losing, and you obviously throw in Tennessee in that as well on the road, the Tennessee game was winnable, and the Vanderbilt game was winnable. Obviously, the Georgia game also losable. The South Carolina game also losable.
Right.
But I don't know how much credit you can give Kalen DeBoer beyond seemed to do a decent enough job, even with the guys who left for Ohio State, of keeping this roster together. Obviously has recruited very well, but has done so off of the back of an all-time coach's reputation that was built up at Alabama in the modern era. So I don't know how much you can point to in terms of crediting Kalen DeBoer. Mostly that they didn't lose to Auburn, right? We see how that kind of matters when you pay attention to Ryan Day and Sherrone Moore. So I give him a B-. If Alabama misses a 12-team playoff, that feels like the absolute height of a grade.
The recruiting has still been solid. I'm looking at it now. We're talking to each other, I believe, on this latest signing day.
Yeah.
On signing day. And at time of recording, their overall rank, their composite is 4th nationally. A top 20 transfer destination as well. Clearly, people still want to go and play at Alabama, even if it's not Nick Saban coaching this. I do think that vibes are stronger now that Ryan Grubb is back with Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah, that's an important distinction because was not able to convince him to come out initially. Yeah.
I like the fact that Grubb is back with Kalen DeBoer. I think that's a no-brainer. I think that will make their offense better. Whoever is playing quarterback for them this season, whether it's Ty Simpson or somebody else, like I think I like that direction. And I still like Kalen DeBoer as a coach. The guy's won everywhere he has been. Last season, I don't think there was any avoiding last season. I really don't. With Saban walking out, with the talent they had walking out, going elsewhere, that's a big transition. And we can't just assume that it's going to pick up and start running the way that it's been running for the last 15 years under Saban. It's just, that's not going to happen.
Right.
That's not going to happen. We're talking about the greatest coach of all time. So I think Kalen DeBoer is fine. As for what happened this season, though, there were definite moments that stood out to me. And we talked about it, I think, a little bit on the Verbies episode we put out on Tuesday. Like, this was Jalen Milroe or bust.
Right.
It turned into Jalen Milroe is going to get them as far as he possibly can. And then anything above and beyond that is just not going to be attainable.
Yeah, it was the Auburn good Bo, bad Bo for
That's
Bo
right.
Nix.
That's exactly right. So, given the level of talent, I would have liked to have seen a more balanced game plan. I did not expect that Jalen Milroe was going to be the team's leading rusher this season. I thought maybe it would be, a guy like a Jam Miller or a Justice Haynes instead, but it was a lot of relying on Jalen Milroe to throw it through the air and run for close to 900 yards and 20 touchdowns on the ground.
Yes.
So I would like to see a little bit more balance. I'm not ready to give up on Kalen DeBoer, not by a long shot. I think he's a fabulous coach. I think he's going to get that program back to where it was before long. It just isn't going to be as bulletproof. And I don't want to be too reactive to that. He's not Nick Saban. He's just not.
But that he got a year. That's it.
He gets
the
1 year.
only year you get.
Exactly. You don't get a long leash when you're at a place like in Alabama, maybe in the wake of previous coaches, but now following the guy in Nick Saban, forget it.
It's, if they miss a 12-team playoff, I give them a year. If they miss a 12-team playoff moving forward, you have to consider that a failure of a season for Alabama,
Totally.
Unless something like their number 1 and number 2 quarterback get hurt.
I
Because
agree with
they
that
should-
100%.
It's going to be, I think, Ty Simpson, Austin Mack. So Ty Simpson, multiple year experience as a college football player at Alabama. Austin Mack, multiple years with Kalen DeBoer, was a backup at Washington, followed him to Alabama now. And Keelan Russell,
Yep.
I think at least a blue chip, if not a 5-star quarterback incoming from Texas.
His composite rating is a solid 100 on 24/7. So he's a 5-star, solid 100.
Woo!
He's a 5-star, high-level talent coming out of Texas. We'll see what role he plays, if any, in that quarterback room. But clearly, Kalen DeBoer can still recruit, and as long as you've got that, you're still in a pretty good spot. But I agree, you're not going to get a whole lot of mulligan years. Not at Alabama.
That was the best defense Kalen DeBoer has ever had.
That's right.
Last year, and they didn't make the playoff. So we'll see.
Where does Elko stack up then?
By the way, did you give DeBoer a grade? I said B minus.
I'm on B minus. Yeah, I'm with you on that. B minus. Where are we at in Elko? So we gave BOB a B plus.
Yeah.
We gave Kalen DeBoer a B minus.
Yes.
Do we slot Elko in between or on one of those two sides of the B spectrum?
So in year 1, Elko was in playoff conversation, and maybe at least until that South Carolina game, certainly after the crazy loss to Auburn. The thing about Elko is Texas A&M was in playoff contention because they were in contention to go to the SEC championship game because they had only lost at a certain point, only to Notre Dame.
That's right.
And then obviously there's the Auburn loss, the South Carolina loss, offensive woes, and Marcel Reed is back this year. I didn't like the Jay Maitman hire when he made it, but there were times when it seemed like the defense was going to be great. And then the offense had issues and obviously injury issues. I think there's a lot to like about where Texas A&M is regardless. I think I like Colin Klein. I think I like Marcel Reed. I think I can. Recruiting seems to be in a strong place, so they lost their headline quarterback commitment this year. there's a lot to like. I don't know that there's a lot to love in this moment yet. So given the season, given how the season ended with the bowl loss to USC, with the loss against Texas that I think they only scored from a pick six,
right.
That there is uphill motion needed on offense. So I'm going to go with a straight B for Elko right now.
I really like the recruiting class.
Yeah.
I really like the recruiting class. I really like the transfer class as well. I love that they went out and they got a guy like KC Concepcion.
Yeah.
From NC State. I mean, maybe I'm still a little too high on him. You know, he's been my guy since the jump. But I really like what they did on both sides of the recruiting game so far this offseason. So provided they can get enough production at quarterback from a guy like a Marcel Reed. They also brought in Jacob Zeno for whatever that's worth to you.
It's not.
I feel really good about the direction of the program, and I'm not so much put off by the fact that, you know, it was an 8-5 year. It was a transition year. He did have a lot of talent leave. He had a lot of talent stay, but it doesn't always hit immediately. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Now, again, Texas A&M paid a lot of money to get rid of Jimbo. I don't know what the leash is going to look like for a guy like a Mike Elko, but he definitely approaches this from a much, much different standpoint. If we're talking about what did a guy inherit? Well, he inherited a lot of talent. He's bringing more talent in. I think what they've done in terms of talent acquisition, getting that alignment, all of that stuff seems really positive to me. If we're talking about vibes, stability, things of that nature, I think Elko inherently gives you a lot of that, even if, again, it was only in an 8-win team this season. I feel pretty good about where this team is headed. Now, look, it wasn't a perfect Texas A&M team by any stretch. I would have loved to have seen more big plays. For example, I think all Texas A&M fans are in the same boat.
I don't think you need to qualify that. I don't think anybody's under any sort of guise that this was a perfect A&M team. Yeah.
But the sense that I get is still that the vibes are strong, to your point. They were very much part of the conversation until late in the game this SEC season. I thought a good first campaign for Mike Elko. I think it, in hindsight, a very good hire, a solid hire. They went with the guy who had been there before, who wanted to be there again. I would still grade it maybe like a C+, B- for Elko.
Yeah, not scoring an offensive touchdown against Texas with the return of that rivalry. I don't know how the vibe can be incredible with Elko in this moment. I don't think Bateman's super popular right now. I don't know. I think confidence in the quarterback position long-term right now is hoping it's okay, but not necessarily proven. Like I like the upside of Marcel Reed, but he still seems a little bit raw. So
yeah, I'm going C+.
Okay. I'm B-. All right. Who was the third, or did you mention a third?
Well, we had Bill O'Brien at the B+.
Oh, right,
we had
right.
Kalen DeBoer B-, and then Mike Elko C+.
Yes.
I've got 4 Big Ten coaches here.
Okay.
That I want to grade out with you. Deshaun Foster.
Yes.
Jonathan Smith. Jedd Fisch. And Sherrone Moore. So Sherrone Moore, 8 wins. Jedd Fisch with 6 wins. And both Jonathan Smith and Deshaun Foster finished 5-7.
Yeah.
On the season. Let's start with Sherrone Moore.
Okay, let's start with Sherrone Moore. I have him. Let me check my notes to verify this is what I have in my head. I have Sherrone Moore as a B.
Wow.
Maybe even B+. This is what Michigan did. Michigan did.
Go ahead. I want to hear this.
I think 7 weeks ago, you could have talked me into a C-. But then you beat Alabama and Ohio State in consecutive games to finish out the season. It's the Dumb and Dumber and completely redeem yourself.
Yeah.
The vibes are pretty high, all things considered, at Michigan. Now, he hired an offensive coordinator or promoted a coach to offensive coordinator who he immediately fired. So, 1, that's not great decision-making on his end. And 2, he took care of it quickly. So, good decision-making there. Then he hired Chip Lindsey. I'm not super high on it. He just seems like a lifer B- offensive coordinator. I don't know. I thought there was opportunity to do something a little bit more brave, but I guess not. The vibes behind the scenes with money and portal and recruiting and NIL seem to be sky high right now, Ty.
Very good. Very good.
So that's great. I don't know. You beat the national champion in Ohio State in the fashion they did on the road, beat Alabama in a weird game, a sloppy game in the rain and mud. They win that game. I wouldn't say they lost anything in terms of like, they didn't lose to an embarrassingly average or bad team. They won a couple losable games early against USC and Minnesota. They were not on the same level as Texas early on. They lose that game by like 19 points or whatever. They lose by 3 touchdowns against Oregon, who was the number 1 team in the nation for a long stretch of the season.
Yeah.
By and large, this kind of season was kind of always going to happen.
It was telegraphed, wasn't it?
It was kind of telegraphed. The thing I do hold against him is not being able to sound the quarterback alarm day one.
Right.
That they needed to tamper with somebody somewhere. As the day he got his job, having seen what Davis Warren and Alex Orji and Jack Tuttle were or were not in practice, that he didn't sound the alarm day one and say, we need to start this tamper job now and get somebody in post-spring portal. That I think was the big whiff from Sherrone Moore. And look, the offensive line had issues. There was not a viable wide receiver in that room. The best, pass catcher by a wide margin was Colston Loveland. So it was just a team that was not built to reach double digits once again. But all things considered,
right?
I don't know, man. Beating Ohio State on the road with this roster covers up
with
for
injuries. With injuries,
with
serious injuries that they had to contend with.
Yeah, no Loveland. Will Johnson didn't play the back half of the season, basically. I don't think it was a great season, but there were great moments that I think saved this grade for me. So I'm going to go flat B.
And I do think since the season ended, you alluded to this a little bit, vibes have been good.
Yeah.
It seems as if they're trying to get actively better, right? Michigan, go back and listen to the episode, the interview that you did with Bruce, where he talks through how Michigan people feel about how they are set up structurally for this NIL era. They feel pretty good about it. They feel like they've got money to spend, that they've got the apparatus in place to go out and get big name talent. They obviously got Bryce Underwood.
Yeah.
That's been pretty well documented at this point. The number 1 overall player, the quarterback, who's right in their backyard. So, I mean, it definitely seems as if Sherrone Moore has a plan here to try and improve things. He may be pulling a little bit of a Marcus Freeman, i.e. figuring it out on the fly, but I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's all right. Again, you buy yourself a little bit of wiggle room when you beat Ohio State and Alabama consecutive games to close out the season. The quarterback thing was maddening. It was absolutely maddening. And I don't know if that's just because Harbaugh left late in the cycle to go to the NFL, and they couldn't feel like they had a chance with anybody else. I don't know if there was just such strong belief in the building on the guys that they had, but the deeper we got into the preseason without having a starting quarterback announcement, I think the writing was on the wall that this was going to be a long year at that quarterback position. And they did get some moments out of Davis Warren. They got none of them from Alex Orji. Obviously, the Jack Tuttle thing didn't work out due to injury, but I don't know. Hopefully, this is something they're able to rectify now and build upon as they move forward, because it seems like they're serious. It seems like Sherrone Moore maybe got some of the first year jitters out of the way, and they're ready for business here. We'll see what they can do. They're going to have an opportunity again next season to play some premier non-conference opponents, or notably early, and show what they did in the offseason.
Yeah.
So we'll know pretty quick what that improvement does or doesn't look like.
Agree.
So you're at a B for Sherrone, huh?
I'm at a B for Sherrone Moore. I just think Ohio State, especially given what Ohio State did, I think it's smoothed over a lot. And it's his grade moving forward is going to be, what does the bridge to Bryce Underwood look like? Is it a 2-game bridge? Is it a 0-game bridge? Is it a 9-game bridge? How many games does Mikey Keene, or whatever the quarterback situation is, look like before the ball is handed to Bryce Underwood?
See, a B feels too high to me. However, if I look at this in context now in the conversation, would I put Sherrone Moore over Kalen DeBoer? I probably would.
They played against each other.
I understand that. But outside of the whole head-to-head thing, if I'm looking at the full body of work, I probably would still put Sherrone Moore. Because do what they did being so limited at quarterback in and of itself is kind of a masterclass. So, all right, let's go B. Where are we at, though, with Jedd Fisch, Jonathan Smith, and Deshaun Foster?
Deshaun Foster, I'm going to give a C-, and that could have been a lot worse given the start of the season, the start of his tenure.
The press conference?
Media Days.
Hello, yes. The press conference?
The opening presser at Big Ten Media Days, sneaking by Hawaii to start things off, not being able to run the ball at all, like kind of disastrous in every element. I still don't think we looked at this together. They didn't score 20 points in a losing effort?
No.
Something like that. So an opportunity against USC late would have probably improved things to a C or C+. That game was within reach. Beating Iowa at home and Nebraska, I believe, in consecutive weeks. Nebraska and Lincoln obviously was the apex of the season for UCLA and Deshaun Foster. But yeah, all things considered, and another situation in which he was handed a difficult task given the timing of Chip Kelly leaving for what he had hoped was going to be an NFL coordinator job. It ended up being Ohio State's coordinator job. Still difficult, and it was, UCLA scrambling very late in the process, so a challenge for him. So you got to take that under consideration. But yes, this was an incomplete team with some talent.
Here's the other thing.
That was not ready to compete.
If you go back and look at the body of work this year, the teams they beat, teams they lost to, you don't come away from that feeling like they lost to a bunch of teams they shouldn't have.
No.
Like they weren't always super impressive. And for sure, there were real issues on offense. But like, there are other coaches on this list who had some inexplicable losses. At least the ones that you see on UCLA's schedule make sense.
And they were right there, by the way, with Minnesota as well, I should note. But yes.
I think I'm with you on the C-, though. And I felt better about Deshaun Foster later in the year than I did early. Right. Once they got through that midway point, it seems that they figured something out. Maybe they just didn't play teams that were as competent. That definitely factors in as well. But
they lost their quarterback of the future to the portal.
Lost in the portal, yeah.
To before, obviously anything could even get going with Dante Moore going to Oregon. Yeah.
I don't know where to put Jonathan Smith on this list. I really don't, because I like him as a coach.
Right.
I do think that he will build that program up. It was a very lumpy Michigan State season. It's a very lumpy Michigan State season. Things like turnover margin were all over the place. But then there were other moments this season where it was like, well, it feels like maybe they've got some momentum. 5-7, not a bowl season for Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. At times plucky, still feels like there's a lot of work. It's like definitely not a complete project at this point in time.
Right.
He's clearly got to add some depth. He's clearly got to make this roster better. But what do you suppose the vibes are like in East Lansing?
I think very meh at the moment. They weren't competitive in a lot of these games. Like scoring, I think they only scored in the Oregon game in garbage time. They only scored 7 against Ohio State. I think they went up early against Indiana. It was like 10-0 or 10-3, and then gave up like 47 unanswered.
That's right.
So not at least like hanging for a while with some of the better teams, given Jonathan Smith's success, given what we saw in terms of talent with Aiden Childs. He just gave the ball away so much.
Yeah, he was irresponsible with the football, for sure. The two games, by the way, that I'm looking at as I'm going through the spreadsheet and talking through some of these coaches, the game on the road against Boston College was ugly, but very winnable. That was early. That was towards the end of September. And then there's the game late October against Michigan on the road, where they lost by 7. That was, I think, a close game as well. That was there for them.
Yes.
If those two games have different outcomes, maybe we're talking about a bowl season and a completely different vibe in East Lansing.
And beating Iowa is not nothing at home. But yeah, they just, I don't know. They weren't competitive enough for me in year one. And there was a lot of changes. A lot of dudes hit the portal. They had to bring in a lot of guys in the portal. I think there are interesting pieces up front. Unfortunately, they lost their best cover corner, I believe. Charles Brantley is going to Miami. and that was a big loss. But yeah, to me, it's going to come down to recruiting. It's going to come down to portal. And right now, I think the vibes are a C, and I think that's perfectly where I am right now. They're kind of getting lost in the shuffle of things with, Michigan. The top the top of Michigan State's ceiling is winning this conference in the modern era, is putting forth a dominant defense with NFL caliber players, top to bottom on a defense, NFL caliber quarterbacks. And we just seem so far from that in this moment. Again, consider the context of Michigan State and how depleted and down things were given the nature of Mel Tucker's departure, and how down they were with Mark D'Antonio's, the end of his time in East Lansing. So this is a downtrodden program, but it's never been easier to build up a roster than it is in the portal era. And if Michigan State is going to continue to have the kind of money that they had to give Mel Tucker $95+ million, then they should be competitive in the portal. And maybe this is a prove it year before, the piggy banks are emptied. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's enormous reason. I don't have their schedule in 2025 in front of me if you want to pull it up.
Yeah,
but
I got it.
If the vibes are improving because the schedule seems workable.
Yeah, by the way, I really like Joshua Eaton, the guy they bring over, I think from Texas State, the cornerback.
Okay.
I like that to help bolster their secondary this season. Looking at Michigan State's schedule here as I pull it up for 2025. Hold on, where are we at here? Michigan State, there we go. Okay, 2025. Okay, at USC, at Nebraska, at Indiana, at Iowa, to go along with games against...
Back half is tough, man.
Against Michigan, against Penn State. That is not an easy schedule by any stretch of the imagination.
They've got 5 weeks. They've got a bye in there, but 5 games to finish things off-ish. At Indiana, Michigan, at Minnesota, Penn State, at Iowa.
That's rough. That
rough. Could be 5 straight high-level defenses.
What do we grade him in? What do we give him a grade?
I said C. I'm even closer to C-.
I'm C-.
Yeah.
And then Jedd Fisch.
Jedd Fisch, full new roster, given what they lost from the national championship appearance.
I think C+.
I'm about a C+ too, I think. So you give him credit because bringing over some key dudes from Arizona, and I think a defensible move in bringing in Will Rogers, who he eventually benched, but losing to Washington State, if we're going to say losing to rival, is always unacceptable, no matter if you're a first-year coach or a 10th-year coach.
No.
Especially given Washington State losing Cam Ward, losing their status as a power conference program, and the game was in Seattle, and the way that game ended with the red zone play calling. It was real ugly. So that's a huge demerit. Losing the way they did to Oregon, obviously just being overwhelmed up front by the Ducks, that reflects poorly.
Yeah.
Losing who they've lost in the portal this year, losing, I think, both coordinators.
Yep.
In Brendan Carroll and Steve Belichick, which, by the way, understandable given where they're going and why they're going. Just nepotism, I guess.
Pure nepotism, yeah.
Recruiting hasn't been amazing. I think they lost their 2 biggest recruits to Oregon, or 2 of their 3 biggest recruits of the 2025 cycle. So there's a vision there. The talent level's pretty good, rebuilding this program on the fly. The recruiting seems fine, but it's hard to pinpoint a specific reason to be very high on Washington moving forward, given the conference and given the state of the roster. So C+.
On the schedule this coming year,
please,
for Washington, Ohio State at home, Husky Stadium. On the road at Michigan, at home against Illinois, on the road against Wisconsin, at home against Oregon, on the road against UCLA. There's also, and the Big Ten is not, at least on this schedule here that I'm looking at, I do have the dates up here. Interesting cross-country letdown game the week after Ohio State, going on the road all the way across country against Maryland. No idea what to expect from Maryland.
Sure.
And then another circumstance a little bit later in the year where middle of October, they're on the road at Michigan. Then they come home the following week to square off against Illinois.
Yes.
So I think those two circumstances, right, where we've got late September, Ohio State immediately on the road against Maryland following week. Then there's Rutgers, the Rutgers buffer in between before they go back on the road against Michigan. Then the following week, come back home against Illinois.
Illinois has a bye the week before.
Illinois got the bye beforehand. Those two stretches of games, at least in the first half of the season, I think are going to dictate a lot of how successful Washington can be this coming year. I make the jokes about Jedd Fisch obviously leaving, and I'm going to continue making the joke about him wanting to go to Florida, although that might not be a thing given where Florida's at. I think the guy knows how to coach. I think he's a good coach, and I think you can see that there is something of a philosophy here at play. So I give him a C+. I actually think Washington, we got about what we expected from Washington this past season. Losing a coach, all of that offensive talent. I mean, it's tough to rebuild from that, and they did a pretty good job, all things considered. So C+ for me. I have a very quick list of G5 coaches.
By the way, just talk about the quick counterpoint, and let's do G5. I have 15 seconds on Washington's schedule. Washington State, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Oregon are all going to have new starting quarterbacks. There is no better time than 2025, it seems, to play against Ohio State and to host Ohio State, given all the things that will be new in Columbus. Michigan, completely new offense. Wisconsin, it's on paper kind of tough looking. I kind of love the timing of it all. The
timing isn't bad. The timing, if you want to play,
love it.
If you want to play Ohio State, play them before the end of September,
and you get your full season to get ready for Oregon. Unlike getting them in early October or whatever, and same goes for Oregon as they rebuild. But I don't hate it for Washington.
No.
Okay,
get Ohio State in Husky Stadium. Why not?
Absolutely.
G5. John Sumrall.
A-. A-?
A-? Come on, that's way too high.
You think so?
Oh, I do.
I know they fell apart near the end of the year, but going from somebody who won as much as Willie Fritz did, getting what they got out of Darian Mensah in year one and Mekhi Hughes, of course, that was a great backfield. I don't know how much he could have done about the run defense as they collapsed and losing to Memphis. There's no shame in losing to Memphis. They were destroying teams. I don't know. They made the conference championship game in year one. They had a prolific offense. I think they had a good year. And if you have a good year,
A- is too high for me.
B+.
With how they close, if you're gonna elevate Sherrone Moore based on how he closed out the season,
but that's the national champ and a rival on the road.
I'll go solid B for John Sumrall.
Oh, no way, man. Okay. I disagree.
So we disagree on that. How about Spencer Danielson, Boise State? First full season, coached, half the season a year ago, but 12-2, went to the playoff, got a first round bye. Pretty hard to argue with that. Obviously got the most out of Ashton Ginty. Wasn't much in the way of a defensive squad, but did what they needed to do to get there, to win the conference and to be the surefire lock to get to that playoff spot.
I just have a solid A.
Yeah, I was gonna say at worst it's an A-, right? It has to be. Bob Chesney.
They were 3 points away from beating the number one team in America for the back half of the season as a Mountain West program.
That's right.
I thought they held their own against Penn State, all things considered. They ran the table. UNLV became a popular pick to, beat them during the regular season and beat them in the Mountain West Championship game in Boise. They held strong. They showcased the best pure offensive talent in the sport in a super smart way, just giving him the ball as often as possible.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's an A. I don't know how you change anything.
It's an A. Bob Chesney, our guy. Bobby Ches. James Madison.
I think close to an A.
I think it's also an A.
I think it's probably an A.
So Curt Cignetti leaves.
Yeah.
JMU loses a lot.
Yes.
Bob Chesney comes down from the Patriot League and puts on a 9-4 season. That's an A for me. Absolutely an A.
They lose to Georgia Southern. Monroe is a bad loss. App State was a bad loss. Marshall's not a bad loss. And they win their bowl game. It might be a B+. Their defense was so good this year that losing games to underwhelming opponents kind of has to be held against them.
So let's go A- then.
I'm going to say A-.
We'll go A-. Ken Niumatalolo at San Jose State not running the option.
Not running the option. I'm going to say B+.
I think it's a solid B+, man. I think this is a good campaign. This is a good campaign proving that he doesn't need the option to win.
I agree. They were competitive, and beating Stanford is not nothing. As bad as Stanford was for most of this year, they were competitive in year one. They beat Oregon State. They beat Stanford, 2 Pac-12 teams last season.
Yep.
And competitive in like a crazy bowl game that they had an opportunity to win. Nothing super embarrassing, and losing a shootout to Wazoo. So, half a second away from beating 3 Pac-12 teams. Up and down because the defense wasn't there, but I think promising. Absolutely.
Speaking of defense not being there, you mentioned Oregon State. How about Trent Bray? There was no defense at Oregon State.
But how much do you hold?
I know.
As a defensive coordinator, he was very, very good. When
this is where maybe we need to split off the coach from the team, because the team's in an impossible circumstance.
Right.
That was always going to be an uphill fight. Trent Bray has a connection to the university. They kept him on the staff after Jonathan Smith left. A popular choice, but definitely has his work cut out for him. They were a much better team on the ground than through the air. They were really bad on both sides of the defensive thing, right? Whether it was against the rush or against the pass. This is a team that lost at Nevada, 3-10 Nevada, which I will talk about momentarily.
Air Force,
Lost at Cal, lost at San Jose State, who we mentioned a minute ago, lost at Boise. I don't think you can go higher than a C.
I think it's a C. Given the teams they lost to. Look, it's completely depleted defenses. What did chemistry tutors playing defensive tackle, something like that? That's what I said.
Yep.
But I don't know. They could run the ball some. Quarterback was kind of a mess. They had to make changes at quarterback, and looking as uncompetitive as they were against some of those teams, you got to hold it against them. But then give them credit. Beat Wazoo.
Yep.
So they are the Pac-12 champs.
That's right.
Competitive against Boise State, a playoff team. So rounded into shape as they got healthier closer to the end of the season, but the lows were too low for me to feel much better. So I'm going to give a C.
I give Bronco Mendenhall a B+ at New Mexico.
It's a fun offense.
They ran the hell out of the ball, man.
Yeah.
That was a good rushing offense. It was a terrible defense. But outside of getting blown off the field, their first 4 games of the year against Montana State. Well, they lost by 4, but
good team, Montana State.
Got hammered by Arizona, got hammered by Auburn, lost handily to Fresno State. Outside of that month of September, they got things going after that. And their 3 losses from that point moving forward at Colorado State, against Wyoming, against Hawaii. The Hawaii game was a 1-score game. The Wyoming game was a 1-score game. The Colorado State game, they lost by 11, but that was a weird game. That was a weird game that it still feels like it was a little bit closer than that final score would indicate. So I think just with the talent on hand, Bronco did a pretty good job at New Mexico. He's going to be at Utah State now.
I was going to say, we get to have this conversation all over again next year. Yeah.
Bronco's going to be at Utah State.
Yeah.
Just a couple other ones that I want to call out real quick.
Please.
Okay. I'm not going to go through all of these guys, but Jeff Choate, I mentioned him at Nevada. The Choate hold is real. And I thought, given expectations at Nevada, even 3-10, that was a plucky 3-10 for Jeff Choate. I thought he did a really good job at Nevada. I don't know how to score that. Maybe give him like a B, but I thought he did an excellent job. So props to him. Major Applewhite at South Alabama had a pretty good campaign, right? After
True.
Kane Womack left and went to coach defense at Alabama, Major Applewhite stepped up. I thought he did a pretty good job.
Agree.
Bryant Vincent at ULM. You talked about the ULM loss being a bad loss for whoever you mentioned. I forget.
Feisty this year.
But I remember distinctly looking at some of the preseason publications. Everybody thought ULM was going to be a doormat, an absolute doormat this year. They were in 23. The expectation was that 24 wasn't going to be a whole lot better. They won 5 games. He's like an A. This is an A job that we saw from Bryant Vincent at ULM.
I agree.
He did a good job, and Pete Lembo did a good job at Buffalo too. Won 9 games.
Absolutely.
Kind of in the throes of that conversation in the MAC.
And that's also a late hire situation.
Yeah.
No linguist heading to Alabama, the date that he did. So yeah, I'm good with all that.
All right, so there you have it, folks. There are some others that we did not mention. Let us know your grades, solidverbal@gmail.com, or you can, of course, always hit us up on social media. Verballers.com is where you can go to support what Dan and I do. And if nothing more, please just hit follow or subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes, Dan.
Yes. That's all I have.
I think that's all we got here. Hope you enjoyed this episode.
You're the best of the class this year.
You really didn't have that on your local TV station.
Not that I know of, Ty.
Oh, man, you missed it.
I can
You
make
missed out on
calls.
it. I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrand, thanks for tagging along here. Our long conversation grading out coaches, first-year coaches from the 24 season. We'll catch you all next week. Stay solid.
Peace.